There's a particular kind of silence that lives between two transmissions on a shortwave radio, a thin, crackling pause where sound becomes possibility. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, that silence was full of names that were never spoken on the evening news, full of static that some ears turned into voices, full of a question that would follow the space age for decades. Had someone gone up before Yuri Gagarin and never come down? The world then was a chessboard of steel and shadow. Two powers raced to stitch a new horizon into human history. And every launch pad, every telemetry stream, every face in a flight suit mattered not just for science, but for pride and propaganda. In Moscow, announcements were sculpted into triumph. In living rooms and ham shacks around the globe, amateurs listened for the exact moment truth might leak through. When you live with an iron curtain between you and the record of events, rumor finds a way to become narrative. Between the roar of engines and the hush of declassified files, there grew a persistent story. The missing cosmonauts. The story has several voices layered into it. There are the listeners, hobbyists and shortwave radio operators, who said they captured transmissions from a stricken vehicle, a panicked call, or a faint human voice embedded in telemetry. There are newspaper columns and late-night radio programs that amplified those tapes and filled in what silence could not. There are the stark facts we can verify. A dog named Laika launched into orbit in 1957 and died within hours. The Soviet program trained a corps of pilots and subjected them to dangerous medical and engineering trials. And in at least one instance, the death of a cosmonaut trainee, Valentin Bondarenko, was suppressed for decades. Beyond that, there are holes in the record, and holes invite story. The recordings themselves are a study in ambiguity. To the imagination, a burst of unintelligible syllables or a telemetry tone becomes a sentence. A crackle is a cough, a weak signal, a last breath. Across Europe and North America, people cataloged spins of static and labeled certain clips as proof of tragedy. Voices calling for help, a sound like metal tearing, radio packets that supposedly matched Soviet frequencies. Those tapes were played on radio shows and later packaged into compilations, and they traveled the world with the same velocity as the rockets they alleged to outpace. But listening is not the same as knowing. Sound can be deceiving. Frequencies can overlap. Early telemetry was crude, and when human listeners encounter something urgent sounding, the mind will supply meaning. Investigations into many of the most famous recordings showed them to be unreliable. Some were misidentified police or aviation chatter, others edited together from broadcasts and dramatizations, and a few were outright hoaxes. Researchers working from open archives, declassified documents, and interviews with the engineers and flight controllers of the era have not found credible evidence of a secret orbital human flight that predated Gagarin and ended in a cover-up of a launch and loss. That is not to say the Soviet space program was transparent. It was not. The state had every incentive to present only success stories. Failures were suppressed. Accidents were sometimes rewritten as training incidents or left unmentioned entirely. The emblematic case is Valentin Bondarenko, a young cosmonaut trainee who died in a training accident in 1961 when a fire broke out in a low-pressure, high-oxygen chamber. His death was omitted from official histories until the late 1980s, and only then did the full, unvarnished account emerge. Bondarenko's fate became proof that there were real, painful costs the public was not allowed to see. There were other losses, too. Test pilots crushed under failing airframes, engineers killed in explosions, animals sent into orbit never to return. Every new technology has a shadow of casualties, and early spaceflight was nothing if not a technology of extremes. Rockets that burned hotter and higher than anything before, re-entry corridors calculated to a razor's width, life support systems that balanced on the edge of oxygen-rich combustion. A A single spark in the wrong environment could mean disaster. That is why secrecy and the temptation to conceal were so powerful. A state that not allowed defeat, a public face, would do what it took to keep that face intact. When Glasnost and the slow opening of archives arrived in the late 1980s, historians began to assemble a clearer picture. Flight logs, test reports, and internal memos filled in many blanks. They confirmed that the Soviet Union had suffered serious accidents and hidden some of them from the general public. They also, crucially, showed no verifiable record of a clandestine orbital mission sent before April 12, 1961, that launched humans into space and never returned. Yuri Gagarin's flight remains, by the best documentary evidence, the first human orbital flight. That conclusion rests on cross-checked telemetry logs, launch pad schedules, statements from engineers and administrators, and the physical evidence of spacecraft hardware. Yet the silence the recordings represent did not vanish with the archives. The mystery persisted because secrecy begets stories that can never be wholly disproven in public imagination. The texture of the missing cosmonauts rumor is not only technical, it is moral and auditory. People heard voices in the dark and refused to believe the state had the moral authority to define which lives would be remembered. The voices recorded on cassette and reel were themselves fragments of grief, of listeners who wanted to be witnesses, of communities that would not accept institutional erasure. Even when investigators could show those particular recordings were not what they seemed, the deeper human question remained: who pays for progress in silence, and who gets to tell the story of sacrifice? There is another dimension to this tale, quieter but no less important: the humanity behind every transmission. When we imagine someone in the void beyond our planet, we imagine their voice reaching back across distance and danger. To the engineers who watched rise and fall on telemetry lines, to the families of test pilots and trainees, and to the cosmonauts who later took the public stages, spaceflight was a team endeavor with named faces and private griefs. Bondarenko's story, finally named and read aloud decades later, was not an affirmation of conspiracy so much as a reminder that institutions can and do protect themselves by protecting silence. A memorial plaque or a published dossier cannot undo the lonely hazard those individuals bore, but acknowledging them alters the tenor of the narrative. It inserts human cost into a timeline that might otherwise read only as technical triumph. And there is the allure of the unknown, a force as powerful as gravity. Myths about lost missions tap into an old strain of human storytelling, the desire for hidden histories, for secret failures that reveal an inconvenient truth. In the space race, this narrative transformed into a morality tale about the limits of power and the unspeakable price of national prestige. Whether the missing cosmonauts were literal faces lost to an unrecorded orbit, or symbolic voices cut by secrecy, the stories asked us to account for what we ask people to risk when we measure a nation by its firsts. In the end, the record we can verify is itself remarkable and incomplete in equal measure. It contains the brilliance of human ingenuity and the dark ledger of accidents and suppressed reports. It tells of a dog sent into the night, of a young trainee whose death was hidden, of a first man whose flight was watched around the world, and of later tragedies that forced the Soviet program and the world to reckon with the cost of exploration. It also contains the testimony of listeners who refused to accept silence and made tapes that became artifacts of our collective concern. Those tapes were not always evidence. Sometimes they were longing. Sometimes they were simple human refusal to let a gap remain unfilled. Ask now what the missing voices demand of us. They demand not only forensic clarity, which historians provide, but moral reckoning. They ask that we remember the unseen toll of any great endeavor. We should look at the archives not merely to settle a debate, but to honor names withheld by fear or calculation. We should measure progress not only in launch successes and orbital hours, but in how transparently we treat failure and in how fully we mourn those who paid for our knowledge. Years from now, when the hum of rockets is ordinary and the first steps on a new world are part of a longer human story, these questions will persist. The truth of the missing cosmonauts is both prosaic and profound. Not all rumors are true, and not all truths are told. The crackle on an old tape might be a misaligned carrier wave, or it might be, in the ears of those who heard it, a bell tolling for a life kept from the public record. Both realities can coexist. Listen then for a moment to that thin silence between transmissions. It is not emptiness. It is the place where we put our curiosity and our conscience. It is the space where we decide whether to honor the light of discovery by also remembering the shadows it cast. The past, like radio static, can be made to speak if we attend to it with care. The question is whether we will answer with only triumph or with the fuller, harder truth of what it cost.